I'd like to welcome everybody to this webinar. We're going to be discussing effective online teaching methods. So this is especially relevant for professors and online programs, or if you are an instructor and you'd like to move into the realm of online. We're going to talk about how online is different than on ground and the characteristics that are needed for both for the professor as well as for the course design in order to really establish a good online learning community and presence within your class. So I want to start out, before we get into online, I want to talk actually about the traditional classroom. Traditional learning, we're in academia, so we know what a classroom looks like, but it can really take on various characteristics. You can have classrooms that are auditoriums that fill hundreds of learners. You might have large stadium classrooms with unreasonably obstructive blackboards. I don't think blackboards is probably anachronistic at this point. It's probably whiteboards or smart boards. Or you might be more familiar, I imagine at our institutions we're very familiar with this more intimate setting of graduate students and adult learners, that they're together in a smaller classroom, I'd say, probably 10 to 20 students gathered together. But traditional learning, regardless the milieu, regardless the classroom size, it tends to have a commonality, which is that the classroom will have a professor, somebody at the front leading and guiding the discussion, and we'll have an audience of participants, of students, an audience of learners here. And then we'll have a professor right up front. Now the professor will come prepared with notes and with lectures, will lead a discussion, eventually ask a question or two. You'll get audience members who are participating, offering their ideas. You might get another person in the classroom who agrees or disagrees with this point and maybe supports the argument with an experience or an example, and eventually the professor will rein everything back in and will provide the insights, provide the guidance. While the professor's talking, then ideally people are having their own thoughts and their own opinions, forming their opinions, thinking about the points that are being said. This is the method that's been used since Socrates, Aristotle, even Jesus, as they're all teaching the multitudes of people. You have what we'd call a sage on the stage, or somebody who is wise and disseminating knowledge to everybody else. Now, an interesting thing about the traditional classroom is that time is a scarce resource in a classroom. Economically, time is a very scarce resource. Whether the class is 50 minutes or an hour and a half long, or if it's a 3-hour class, time is scarce. And when one person is talking, that means that person is talking and nobody else is talking. And so it's like you pass the talking stick from one person to another person. Only one person can talk at a time. Now, ideally, lots of people will be thinking. That's actually quite encouraged within classroom settings, is that people will be thinking about what the professor or other students are saying, making connections, learning, we might call that. But the interesting thing is that ideally, this person will be thinking about what is being said. Sometimes they might dwell on that idea, and they might engage in tangential thought. Now, tangential thought actually can be deleterious, not deleterious, but it can be distracting in a synchronous, traditional classroom setting, because that means the thinker might miss important discourse. If this person is thinking about something important, making connections, light bulbs are going on about this other topic, then that person might be missing what's being said right here, because you can't think about one thing and also think about another thing at the same time. So in that sense, there might not be as much room for tangential thought in a traditional classroom. Now, that's why Mark Twain is credited with saying something to the effect that college is a place where a professor's lecture notes go straight to the student's lecture notes without passing through the brains of either. And essentially, the image that I kind of pull in the traditional classroom is that this person, this professor, this sage on the stage, is kind of like on a lake, or large body of water, driving a very powerful motorboat and pulling along many skiers. It's like in the the old days when you'd see skiers on top of each other's shoulders forming a pyramid, and that's like the class. The professor is pulling all these skiers, and you better hope that you don't get distracted or drop the rope or trip and fall, because the professor's probably taking off and going, and they don't want to circle back for you. Not that all traditional education is like that, but I want to shift gears now and talk about the online classroom. What does the online class look like, and how is it different than this traditional setup of education? So I pulled this image. One thing I like about this image in terms of the online classroom is that a lot of people are contributing. You notice there's a lot of crossfire right here, because in online, multiple people can be talking at the same time. In the discussion board, not everything has to be, okay, now it's your turn, now it's your turn, now it'll be my turn, and our hour is up, so everybody go home. In online learning, it takes place over several days, perhaps. A discussion board might be a week long. But I also like this image because there are a lot of learners here, and you don't really know who is the teacher. And that's very different than this other image of the professor at the front of the stage. In online learning, the more important thing is that the professor guides the learning that takes place. So they call it the guide on the side model, as opposed to the sage on the stage. And yes, the professor has to be well versed in the content, and yes, the professor has to know the material, but ultimately the professor also needs to leave that professorial ego in the office and become one with the class. And also there's an expectation that everybody will participate. There are no back row sleepers, like how I was in History 201 in college. I slept a lot in that class, and that wouldn't be acceptable in online learning. You can't sleep and get away with it. So as opposed to a professor who's driving a powerful motorboat, pulling a bunch of skiers behind in the wake, online learning is more like everybody, the whole class is in a sailboat. The students are fanning the sail. Ultimately, the professor does steer the boat. He does have his hands on the rudder, or whatever you call it. I should have looked up what that's called, but he's in charge of, or she is in charge of the direction that the boat goes in, but it's a communal effort in that sense. So online learning, really where it thrives is that instead of the typical, sorry, I just found out it's a tiller. So the professor has his hand on the tiller, or her hand on the tiller. Yeah, thank you, Leah. So online learning is different than the traditional classroom in that it can really emphasize this theory of constructivism, or constructivist learning theory. And so constructivist learning theory occurs as the learners are actively involved in the process of constructing meaning and knowledge from the course content, as opposed to passively receiving the information. So in this image here, we have a lot of people are contributing. This person has an idea or some data, and it blends with this other person's experience, and this person has a background in something, and so they're forming a reality that is knowledge. Everybody in the classroom is contributing. They're all contributors, and they're all beneficiaries of others contributing knowledge, and that's how the learning takes place. And it's a meaningful contribution in that I'm sharing my personal experiences or my professional experiences, and we're applying this to real life, as opposed to something more sterile, which can definitely take place in online or traditional. But ultimately, the duty of online professors then are, even more than the traditional method, is to create opportunities for students to be active contributors of their education and, like this image here, collaborators with other learners. And that's not to say that the traditional professors don't do that, or don't try to do that, or that they can't do that, but it's really a specific duty and responsibility for online professors to build that community. So how do we create a supportive online course community? I'm going to talk about many things in this webinar, some tips, some strategies, some research. But before I get on to steps 2, 3, 4, LMNOP, step 98, 99, and get to 100, I want to start with 1, which is that this is a very vital portion of a very vital responsibility for an online professor in order to be successful, and that is to be present. Be present in your course. Be active in the course multiple times per week or daily. I mean, the expectation, and students, we'll be honest, have unreasonable expectations, but the expectation is that the professor is accessible 24 hours during the day and 7 days a week. And we know that's kind of ridiculous because we have family and we have church and sleep and things. But the students are, if the student's online, then the thought is that, is the professor online? Let me text this professor, you know. And it, you know, it's not like we get text messages at 4 in the morning every single morning. I hope not. If so, then you might need to address that in your class. But ultimately, at the beginning of the course, it's important to clearly state the program and your personal policies. State, this is how often I will be in class. This is my personal policy. I'll be online during these hours, or you can reach me at this number, or if you need some emergency, at this other number. I might not be responsive at this time of the week. But you can be present in the course. There are many different ways to be present, and so you should liberally use certain tools that are available to you through the learning management system. And one would be announcements, course discussion posts, and if you have a blog, you can be blogging, you can communicate through email. There are a lot of ways that you can be present in a course. And it's a good practice, I would say, to communicate with the students clearly if you're going to be gone for 2 or more days. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes you get pneumonia, you have a conference that you're presenting at, and you'll be traveling. And hopefully the students will be understanding of that, but make sure that you communicate. And realize also that in a traditional classroom, students bond with their face-to-face professor just by the sake that they are there. They're present with each other. They have office hours. There's that face-to-face presence. In an online classroom, that bond is only felt when the professor's presence is felt consistently. And so when you're in the classroom daily, that shows that the professor cares about questions and concerns, that those are important, cares about thoughts, experience, and contributions of the students. And ultimately, daily presence also shows that the professor mentors and guides and challenges the students. And this can be overwhelming. I mean, I'm saying be in your class every day of the week for the rest of your life. I mean, that can be overwhelming. So some things that you can do is focus on maybe discussions and announcements, and maybe limit the one-on-one emailing. Try and maximize your efforts so that you reach the large community. Of course, be accessible one-on-one for your students. But ultimately, one of the worst things that you could possibly hear in your online course is anybody here? I mean, that's just awful. Let me just get that out of the way. You do not want that to be said. So let me give you a tip, a Canvas tip here. And this is about time-released announcements. This is a wonderful feature, I will tell you, a great feature. And that you can post, I mean, ideally, maybe you post whatever you want, maybe 2 announcements every week for the course, the duration of the course. So if you're posting 2 announcements on 2 different days during the week, that means you're automatically present 2 days out of every 7. But you can delay your posting. So here in this, let me get that laser pointer again. This is a typical announcement in Canvas. I edited the page, the announcement. I have my content up here. Right below the file attachment option is this delay posting. And so really you can go, let me highlight that for you. You can set up all of your announcements before class even starts, and then you can determine which days and what time are those announcements going to be published to the class. And so ultimately you probably want a few announcements on the first day of class, and then you can say, I know that week 4 they're doing that one project, so let me post an announcement here on the 20th or something, and then I'll do a follow-up announcement on the 23rd, kind of a check-in thing. And you can have as many announcements as you want, and then you can determine when those announcements are released. So great tool that I highly recommend that you employ and you can get all of these announcements out before the class even starts, and automatically you're guaranteeing your presence in the class to some extent. And I know I mentioned be present, but I also have a warning about that. Too much presence can actually hinder this constructivist model here. And what I mean is that you do not need to feel like you need to add significant contributions every time you check in. Remember that you're the guide on the side. We don't know which of these is the instructor, but ultimately whoever it is has experience, and they're nudging the students in the direction they want them to go. But you don't need to write a tome every time you participate in a discussion thread, and maybe even hold back a little bit, but do post, but then encourage the students to consider a different avenue that they can try. So instructor presence is very important. It's not the only type of presence in the course, and actually there's lots of research on faculty presence suggesting that there are three types of presences primarily, which is social presence, teaching presence, and cognitive presence, which we'll talk about as part of this model, which is very ideal for online learning, which is called the community of inquiry. So I talked a little bit about the teaching aspect. I'm going to touch on that more in a little bit. But then the social aspect in the corner there, that's really building a community, a learner-to-learner relationship community. In the traditional classroom, you have a community of learners. They develop natural relationships. They have opportunities to interact with each other and cultivate these relationships, and sometimes they're even outside of the classroom. In an online learning environment, these relationships need to be planned and coordinated. And then this other aspect here, this cognitive domain, it involves meaningful course design and the presentation of curriculum in a meaningful way that promotes sustained reflection and discourse. So in that domain, the students engage with the content of the course. So a lot of that is determined before the course even starts in the way that the course is designed. And ideally, a good strategy for building an optimal and supportive online community is to ensure that there's an equilibrium of this social, cognitive, and teaching domain, if I got my pointer there. So I'm going to show a few kind of fun examples of, what if there isn't that balance right there? What if things are askew? What would that look like? What would be the consequence? So first let's take that cognitive domain completely out of the scenario there. So there is no curriculum, there's no content in the course. So essentially what we've created is an unstructured internet meeting space where one of the participants happens to have a PhD. This structure I'll just mention, it would not be accredited. I don't think accreditation bodies would care so much. It would be basically an online chat room. So that probably won't exist. What if we get some sort of Mickey Mouse kind of introduction? Teacher has a large presence, and like I warned against, you need to be present, but you don't need to be overwhelming. And so we have a small cognitive, small social presence. Essentially, this equates to that professor who rambles on about his son's performance at a baseball camp and then forgets to assign the homework at the end of class. And it's not a likely scenario for online learning, I would say. Although, again, professors should be wary of monopolizing discussion boards. So what if there is too much cognitive, not enough social and teaching? This model right here is kind of like the early days of e-learning, where we have data dumps. Dr. Merrow talks about data dumps. A lot of resources online, a little bit of teacher interaction, not really very much person-to-person. And so this was a course design pitfall that hopefully we don't fall into today, because we have a lot of strategies and technology available to prevent this kind of course design. But this would be like assigning a lot of readings with very few assessments to actually gauge learning outcomes. It might be akin to a teacher handing out a boatload of readings and book chapters and articles and say, okay, read all of this, and at the end of the week you have a quiz. You're on your own. And then the professor checks out and essentially just gives the students busy work. There's not a good equilibrium right there. This other model we probably don't see it in online, but I likened this to the high school study hall, or homeroom, what they call it. A lot of socialization going on, good relationships, maybe a little bit of content, and then the teacher's in the corner looking at internet memes and creating GIFs, doing his own thing or her own thing over in the corner. So that's not ideal either. I mean, what we want, so those are just some examples of what would not be a community of inquiry, what's not a supportive online learning community. But ultimately, we want equal dialogues between the faculty and the learner. Let me pull up my laser here. Faculty and learner, which is this section right here, the learner and the learner, as well as the learner interacting with the resource. And this teaching cognitive overlap is very important. I'm not going to touch on that today at this webinar. I'm just going to focus on this part of the Venn diagram for today. In fact, my next slide even highlights that, what I'm going to focus on. So let's talk about this teaching, the teaching presence and the social presence interlapping. How can a teacher, what's the teacher's role in creating a good supportive online learning community? There are many tools and many resources that professors can employ. So we'll have announcements, like I mentioned, and that good tip is create a bunch of announcements at the beginning of the semester and release them throughout the semester, and all of a sudden you are engaged in your classroom. I apologize. So you can also, at the beginning of the week, you can have weekly concept overviews. Explain, it could be informal, it could be at the beginning of the module. What are we going to cover this week? You can create videos for your students. Create videos, put them on YouTube, create videos, put them right into Canvas, webcam videos. Students really appreciate seeing the face and hearing the voice of the professor. Interacting on discussion boards obviously would be a very important and productive way to engage with your community. You can also leave, you want to leave good feedback, constructive feedback, and comprehensive and substantial feedback. And you want that feedback to be in a timely manner as well. And one of my biggest struggles is grading papers. It takes me a long time to grade papers, and so I have to really work to get those turned around quickly. What you don't want is to hand back a paper several weeks late, which I've done. My Achilles heel as a professor would be those papers. But students appreciate timely responses. And in Canvas, you can leave video feedback as well. Right in the gradebook, you can record your webcam, or you can upload a video that you make on your phone or anything, or something like that. Another interesting method would be video. Using videos, let the students see you and hear you and get to know you. We can be jealous of those on-ground professors in the traditional setting that they get that FaceTime with students, or we can actually have FaceTime with students. You can create podcasts or mini lectures, hold office hours. There are different ways. You can use GoToMeeting. You can have live chats. You can have texts, an hour of, I'm available by text. You can have Twitter events with a hashtag. I've created hashtags for my courses as well, and we're going to talk more about social media in a couple weeks in a webinar. Another idea is video. Actually, there are many ways that you can do video, and students really appreciate that, in case you don't know. But that's a great way to engage with the community, that they can be close to you as a professor, and that really helps them come out of their shell as well. And here's an idea as well that I wanted to throw out to you, and I've never done this, but it might be an idea, is give extra credit for office hour attendance, because if you have experience teaching in an online setting, then you also have experience having office hours that students don't come to. You might have a class meeting and there might be 1, 2, 3, or 4 students out of 16 or 12, or there might be no students. I've had office hours where nobody shows up at all. So maybe give extra credit. I would say the extra credit should be minimal. It should be such that if they attend many sessions and they're on the cusp of a grade at the end of the term, then maybe that could bump them up. And don't give them extra credit for every session they attend. Maybe every other session that they attend, or every 2 sessions they attend, rather, they can earn 10 points or 5 points or whatever it is, but not just the one session. And and they have to speak and actually talk to you and engage and interact with you in the class during that session. And if they do that enough, maybe they could have 20 points at the end of the semester, and that pushes them from an A- to an A or whatever it is. So many methods in which the teachers can engage with their students, and what are some of the ways that students can interact with other students? Also a very important part of the Venn diagram right there. I threw together a few different ideas, and based on my research, looking at other institutional blogs and publications, came up with a few. I mean, so the big one would be course introductions, which I think that every class in our institution, I imagine, every online class has a section in the modules or the first unit or the course home with introductions where students can meet each other, talk about each other, and just get to know each other. What I do with my introductions for not every class, but for some of my classes, and I know a broken record and everything, but I have them post a video as their first post, and I have them do it in Canvas. I give them instructions with pictures and let them know the process for doing that. But it's good for them to get face time. It really takes them out of their comfort zone. So I don't have them create videos very often throughout the course, but every once in a while I do require it. And students really appreciate seeing each other. I've taught classes where it's towards the end of their program, and they have never actually seen each other face-to-face. They know each other by writing, by discussion, by email, and they've never actually seen what the person looks like when they're talking. So that can be effective. Weekly cafes. So I'm going to give a shout out to Pacific Oaks College. I taught a couple of classes in their OLC program, which is org leadership, and they have these weekly cafes, which is every Monday they participate in the cafe. It's very informal, at least I felt they were very informal with different purposes. They get to know each other. They can share personal updates. It can be super personal about family, friends, pets, hobbies, photos that they can share. Sometimes the photos are of them skiing or attending a wedding or a weekend outing or a concert. And then they write a blurb about how they can apply the context of the previous week into their work or life, which again is constructivism. They're incorporating the content of the course, this cognitive domain, and they're bringing it into the social context with that overlap. And they're applying it in a meaningful way that I learned some things, and instead of it just being something from a book, I learned it and went to work and then thought about it at work and applied it, knowing that I have to share in my weekly cafe and report back something constructive. Another thing you could consider is having general open student forums for students to request or post help and assistance. That could be peer-to-peer. They can request help, another student can respond, or peer-to-professor. I know a lot of classes already do something like this, and they put it in the course home page. And another thing would be create maybe a student union or a student coffee shop. It can be a formal student group in Canvas. With just a side note, reach out to me if you teach in Canvas and you don't know about groups, and I can give you some resources on how to create groups from your students or with your students. Anyway, you can create a group, a specific group for your class, and where they can collaborate, brainstorm, interact, support each other, and it's apart from the actual class in Canvas. You can also, this is something that I've never done, but I've always wanted to. I've heard this at least one or two conferences, and I think it's a fascinating idea, but assign discussion moderators. Assign students to moderate and facilitate the discussions instead of you taking on that whole responsibility yourself. So you would provide the guidelines and expectations, you would give maybe a brief training, and then supervise throughout the week and rotate the moderators each week. For large classes, that might be hard. You could consider, again with the group idea, dividing the classes into smaller groups, maybe 6 or 7 students, and then you'd have 1 or 2 moderators moderating that smaller group discussion instead of having a class-wide discussion. Once you get up to like 20 students, the responsibility of moderating for a student might be a little overwhelming, but divided into smaller groups, then it might be something feasible. And I think it would give a good responsibility to the students, help them to stay engaged, help them appreciate what it is to teach and moderate the content. Another idea would be project work, which I just heard a groan among a large student population, as if several students are groaning in union. Projects can be poorly executed, but they can also be very effective, especially in online learning. The project work should be collaborative, such as you can assign a page where they create a wiki page, or an assignment where they create a wiki page, or a blog where they blog throughout the semester. But you need to design assignments in such a way that they all need to contribute. Because if it can be done by one person, then it will probably get done by one person. In other words, an assignment that an individual could complete without the collaboration of others is really an individual assignment and not a group project. And part of that is, as an online professor, what you can do to increase engagement is recognize individual effort and know that recognition is a two-way street involving both incentives and penalties. But when students feel as though they're individualized, then their presence, they feel like their presence is being monitored, and they'll act differently than if they hide behind the ambiguity of the group presence. And that's the risk that we fall into, is social loafing in group assignments. And we typically know in the first week or two who that would be, and so assign groups accordingly. I also think it's a good idea to have long-term groups, maybe for the duration of the course. Not to say that you can't have a group just for a particular module or for a particular week, but there might be some benefit to them having a group that extends for the duration of the course. An example that I can share is from a course I teach in a bachelor's program, where I have group annotated bibliographies. So you'll have group members. One group member might search for an article and write a summary, and then the other group members, maybe 3 in the group, will be in charge of critiquing, formatting, peer reviewing, and then they'll rotate those responsibilities each week. And if it's a bachelor's course, I'd probably assign the leader for each week. For graduate courses, you might just have them do that themselves, but get them all engaged. So I have a comment here. Attrition also affects the ability to use group assignments, and if live discussions are encouraged as part of these, students living in other time zones complicates that as well. So one thing about group assignments in general, and the benefit to these asynchronous discussion boards that we have, is that people can contribute regardless where they are in the world. You can have somebody from Ireland and Australia in your class, and they can participate in these discussions. And so the group work, it might be difficult. It probably is going to be difficult in a lot of our programs for them to be able to have live discussions. Those tools are there. We have GoToMeeting. We have collaboration tools in Canvas, texting, chatting. Everybody pretty much has long-distance calling these days. It is possible, but you can also leverage the asynchronous capabilities. You can have wiki pages right in Canvas, which might be another webinar, and you have elements like Google Docs. Actually, nowadays, I think we're moving from Google Docs, and we have Microsoft Office. We have Office 365 Professional, so all of us, through our work credentials, have access to Office 365, which includes OneDrive for sharing documents, and also Word, that we can collaborate with each other, that you don't have to meet at the same time necessarily to still have an effective group project. So where can faculty go to learn more about peer-reviewed, evidence-based online teaching methods at TCSPP? I've read articles. I actually incorporated peer review a couple years ago, and I researched it. I had to do it for an assignment in a class out of necessity for whatever reason I can't remember, but there are resources. So I just search on our own archives, our databases, look for peer review, or Google Scholar peer review. I probably have something hidden on my computer somewhere, but I just reorganized all of my files, and now I don't know where anything is, or else I would offer to mail that to you. But peer review has been shown empirically to be a very effective tool and an engaging tool for students. And so I definitely, sorry, I meant peer-reviewed, published methods, just answering a question here for teaching online. Yeah, reach out to me, Crystal, and we can chat more about that offline. You have to jump ahead a little bit. So group projects can be a very effective tool for the social presence and online. So I definitely suggest it. So moving on, now we have this domain intersect that is social and cognitive, which is how the learner interacts with the material, with the course design, the content of the course. And so one thing that I suggest that the online professors do is at the beginning of the semester, this could be one of those pre-written announcements that I was talking about, but establish guidelines at the beginning of the course regarding time commitment, milestones, and expectations of the students. Let them know how much time is this going to take, when am I going to have to dedicate the time. You know, we're talking about this section right here. We might refer to seat time, we might refer to project work, but yeah, definitely set those guidelines and expectations. Let them know what this course is going to be like. In terms of discussion boards are a great way that students collaborate, or they incorporate the course material into their learning. And so also I suggest as another announcement right at the beginning of the semester is do a discussion expectations announcement. And in that, you want to define everything, everything that's important to you as the professor that you're looking for in a good discussion post. Let them know what a good discussion board is going to look like in your class. And that might entail the length of the initial post, definition of what a substantive post is. It's easier for me to type out that word than it is to say that word, I guess. You know, is quantity important? Specify the quantity of posts throughout the week. How many times do they need to check in to the discussion post? How many days of the week should they be present in the discussion post? What does a proper reply to other student posts entail? Is it important that they proofread their post before they publish it? Is formatting important? Do you care about APA? And also, as a side note, if you have these expectations for the students, then that points back to you as well. So remember, be present in the discussion post. If you expect that students will be in the discussion 4 days of the week, then you better be in at least 4 days of the week. And a good guideline, this might sound overwhelming, but post 150% responses according to your class size. So if you have 10 students, you should probably post at least 15. And that's just my own guideline, what I suggest. Sometimes 200% would be good. And not every post has to be a novella. You know, you don't have to write an essay. It could be nudging them in the right direction, you know, making sure that they're on track. So another way that you can engage in this intersect of social and cognitive would be solicit feedback from your students. I know we have the course evals at the end of the term, which is around now. They're going to be sent out. But you can administer your own surveys, polls, even extra credit questions. Very simple, but get some feedback. Let the students tell you how they're doing. Ask them what's working so far. How could your learning experience be improved? You know, what do you need from me in order to better facilitate your learning? What kind of things have you learned in this course so far that you think will be good and important for your life? Another good thing to incorporate in this cognitive dimension here is incorporate digital content that is applicable to their lives. And it's easier today than it ever has been. And I wrote that sentence yesterday, and today it's already easier than it was yesterday. I didn't actually write that, but so you can incorporate journal articles. We have access to the latest journal articles, current events. For those who are brave enough to read the news these days, look for relevant things that are happening that might apply to the course, the content. Look for blogs, or you can blog yourself, or look for relevant blogs from industry leaders. You can create a podcast, or you can incorporate podcasts, relevant podcasts. If you're teaching a behavioral economics course, for example, then maybe you'll want to get the latest episode of Freakonomics Radio and embed that into Canvas. One thing I did one term, I guess I've done it once or twice, is I created a Pinterest board just for that class, and then throughout the term I would pin interesting articles to my Pinterest board, and I embedded that right into Canvas, and then I created a page at the beginning of every module, or part of the the top portion of each module. Here's my Pinterest board, and I also let students, if they wanted to contribute to it, then I think I put in their institutional email addresses as contributors, and so that we could kind of build that constructivist, again, learning, relevant articles that are embedded right into Canvas. There are a lot of OER, which is open educational resources, out there today, and a big one I would say is Canvas Commons, which is our learning management system. Canvas Commons has amazing resources. You can see what other professors are teaching. You can download their content or just embed their content right into your class. So there are a lot of interesting ways that you can incorporate relevant digital media into your classroom. Another idea that I had regarding this domain here is we know about discussion threads. We've talked a lot about discussions in the class, but what if you, and this is just an idea that you might consider, create a discussion debate to take place. So how I envisioned that was you would break your class into two groups, a pro group and a con group, and create a meeting space for them, which is, again, a group within Canvas, where they can meet and they can construct arguments about a certain topic. You might say, are roses the best flower, or whatever, and you'll have people defending that yes they are, and another group saying no they're not. And then you can have a main discussion thread where the groups post. And my thought is that each group can post every other day. So maybe on even days, the group pro posts. I'm not very good at saying that. On the odd days, then the group con might post. So Monday would be pro, Tuesday we'll hear the con arguments, and they have a whole day to read the comments that the other group, and then they can discuss it in their group, and then they can formulate a comment and post that comment. So the actual discussion thread will be fairly light, but the discussion with the group would be pretty substantial. You can also, as I mentioned with the previous section, another way to incorporate that cognitive social domain would be having group work, such as wiki pages. You can have a class or a group that curates a wiki page, just like Wikipedia, and they research it throughout the duration of the term. You can have student blogs as well, and then link work to current events and to their workplace. They can really incorporate and apply the content to their work, which will be more meaningful for them. So ultimately, these are things to consider. Again, we want to make sure that these different dialogues are equal, that we don't have some weird skewed shape like what we showed before. So we're looking at faculty-learner engagements, we're looking at the learner-learner engagements, we're looking at learner-resource engagements. And so in the last, I want to be able to open up the mics at the end, but I looked up a few different sources about what makes a good online professor. What does that look like? And so I came up with some sources right here at the bottom. I can send those out later, but essentially, so Kirscher wrote an article about, and he outlines all of these. Oh dear. Okay. These are the characteristics, and this is bad form. This is a bad webinar thing for me to do, but I'm just going to read these. He says a good online professor will be organized, highly motivated, enthusiastic, committed to teaching, supports student-centered learning, again, constructivism, open to suggestions, because right now online learning isn't the wild, wild west like it used to be, but there are still many different ways in which we can improve our platforms and improve our techniques. Looking for somebody who's creative and who can take risks, which is how we got into online learning as an industry. Manages the time well, responsive to student needs, disciplined, interested in online delivery without expectation or other rewards, because it can often be a thankless job, and we need brave people out there who are committed ultimately. Savory published something, the acronym VOCAL, I guess. So we're looking at visible, organized, compassionate, analytical, and a leader by example. And then this last column here would be the Illinois Online Network. So they're looking at, my laser tool got stuck, life experience, demonstrate openness, concern, flexibility, sincerity, strong written communication, which I would argue should be a requisite for students matriculating into online programs as well. A facilitator, a critical thinker, and ideally trained in online teaching. And for those of you, it looks like 40 of you have endured this webinar, and that's a good step in being trained in online teaching. We've talked about many different techniques and attributes, a few methods and models, but ultimately the online professor, when you look at all of this, doesn't exactly mirror the attributes of what we would consider a good traditional teacher. I just finished one of those Dan Brown books, the sequel to the sequel or whatever of Da Vinci Code, and so you have Robert Langdon, and he always thinks back to his days in the classroom at Harvard, and he says something, and then he counters the student, why don't you consider this alternate thing, and then light bulbs are turning on, and then now that I have your attention with that, why don't you consider this, and he just sculpts the classroom experience in a way that is only fiction. But you have to think, like, Robert Langdon actually be a good online professor? Because just because you're a good professor in the traditional sense, that does not translate into being an excellent online professor, and vice versa. And blended learning is very different than online learning or traditional learning as well. So it's a different skill set, and it's a unique person who can really teach in online learning. And so with that, I have we're wrapping up. I wanted to give us just a few minutes, 10 minutes at the end. If you have questions, comments, any particular rants,